So let's take a look at the most iconic Emperor's Children infantry. Time to bring the sound and sensation with Noise Marines and talk about what they can and can't do in-game. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Emperor's Children once more, and in this video I thought we'd take a focused look at the Noise Marines and talk about what all those sonic weapons can do on the battlefield. Let's talk briefly about their model and lore, look through their datasheet options, and then all the options they have for supporting them in terms of other units and attachments. In the lore, Noise Marines are Chaos Space Marines dedicated to the deity Slaanesh. They've been around for a very long time, since the earlier days of Warhammer 40k, and have generally been most associated with the Emperor's Children Legion, even if some other Slaaneshi warbands might have their own versions. Like many Slaaneshi followers, the Noise Marines augment their senses, often having great eye lenses and amplified auditory receptors in particular, with nothing overstimulating their pleasure centres more than the din of battle, employing great sonic weapons to blast apart the foe with great screams and sonic waves. Their war gear almost as similar to hellish musical instruments as they are guns. The sonic blasts can physically shake targets apart and potentially resonate straight through solid walls without losing potency when they're deployed at the right frequencies. And even if they don't physically destroy their targets, they might render them utterly unable to fight, senses overloaded or mind destroyed by the sheer sensation of them. They have a few pieces of fun artwork in the Emperor's Children Codex. Quite fun to see sonic weapons being deployed as sort of beams of glowing sound here. You probably wouldn't want to be these guardsmen getting in the way. And over the years they've had a couple of different models. Their kit that they've had around for absolutely ages has been a metal then resin upgrade sprue to the standard Chaos Space Marine kit, giving them sonic weapons and a few other Slaanesh trappings. And Games Workshop did release this standalone limited edition Noise Marine miniature in the past as well. He was a bit of a fan favourite miniature, and kind of cool in that he had a combi guitar as well. Now though, with the updated model range, Noise Marines got redesigned in a fairly big way. They've slightly changed their aesthetic a bit, from being more normal Space Marine infantry to being kind of Havoc equivalents for the Emperor's Children. And as a result, they're slightly bigger and up-armoured and tend to be just a little bit slower and more ponderous than their kin on the battlefield. And they changed their backpacks as well to make some enormous speakers a great big feature. Every speaker grill on those, and also on their sonic weapons, a great big demonic face. In general, their models seem to have gone down fairly well with most people out there. They're going to be boxed in 6s, and have the options to equip 2 of them with Blastmasters and one as a Disharmonist squad leader, the guy with the power sword in the middle there. We don't know their eventual price tag yet. They'll likely be around £42, $65 or €53, which looks like it's going to be sort of middling points per dollar as Games Workshop goes. Not the very best, but not the very worst either. For their first release though, they'll be coming out in the Champions of Slaanesh box set. This one's the launch box for the Emperor's Children, and at time of recording this is going live tomorrow. And this one does contain a good amount of Noise Marines, 2 separate squads of them, alongside 2 sets of the Emperor's Children troops and the Lord Exultant and the Codex. If you were looking to pick up the box set and wanted to support the channel while doing so, feel free to check out the discount retailers linked in the video description. They can save a bit versus buying direct from Games Workshop, though amounts might vary depending on where they are around the world. If it goes like the previous box sets like the Death Core of Krieg and the Blood Angels though, they might well sell out quite quickly, and faster at discount retailers versus the Warhammer web store. These are the times where they go live around the world at these discount retailers, so if you're sure that you want to pick up one of the box sets, it might be worth getting there early. Models and their release aside though, let's get on to the actual stat line for the Noise Marines, and talk through their datasheet and how much damage they can do. For their base stats, they get a movement of 6, a toughness 5, a 3+ save, 2 wounds, leadership 6 and OC 1. As mentioned, the toughness 5 is because they're sort of being treated as Havoc equivalents, which Games Workshop decided to give slightly increased armor stats to them in the core Codex Chaos Marines, and that's also the reason that they have slightly lower movement than the rest of the Emperor's Children as well, moving 6 unlike the 7 inches of the Tormentors and Infractors. For keywords, they have the ones that you'd expect, Infantry, Slaanesh and Chaos. They don't have grenades, so they can't use those to double down for a few more mortal wounds, and their printed points cost in Codex Emperor's Children is 135 points, though Games Workshop might change that in digital updates for all we know at the moment. For the most interesting bit though, let's get on to the weapons, and their base loadout are standard sonic blasters. These are 3 shots at 18 inches at strength 5, AP -1 and damage 2 with ignores cover. So quite a close range shooting squad, but one that's going to be pretty effective against the vast majority of toughness 5 or less infantry out there. Really quite good at splatting standard Space Marines given the damage 2, and ignores cover is quite a big deal given Warhammer 40k 10th edition where almost everything can get cover really quite easily. In melee, their standard profile is 3 attacks at strength 4 and damage 1. The real threat of the unit feels like it comes from the Blastmasters though, and they certainly feel like they do the heavy lifting for the squad. They're also 18 inches, so far lower than the big 48 inches that they had before, and with their big profile they hit with 3 shots at strength 10, AP -2 and damage 3, so a fairly brutal anti-Terminator style profile there, though it's going to be good against anything that's toughness 10 or less really. Ignores cover is again really quite nice. The Blastmasters do have an alternative firing mode as well though. They get 6 shots at strength 6, AP -2 and damage 1 with ignores cover, and you can take 2 of them per unit. Finally, the squad's Disharmonist can trade out the Sonic Blaster for both a Screamer Pistol and Power Sword if you want to. This is basically taking a range hit on the Sonic Blaster, as the Screamer Pistol has the same profile but only 12 inches with the pistol keyword, and as the reward for taking that small range hit, you get 4 attacks at strength 5, AP -2 and damage 1, which is quite a solid upgrade on their base melee profile. It's still not going to make them an overall good squad in melee or anything like that, but given that the only trade-off is 6 inches worth of range on one model, I feel like you could fairly happily take or leave the melee version, or just keep the squad really focused and effective at 18 inches. For their damage output without any further buffs, this is the amount of models that they'd expect to slay from a range of different targets. A squad of 6 of them will kill around about 11 Termagants, so solidly good against light infantry, around about 5 slain Space Marine Intercessors, around 2 to 3 Terminators, with the Blastmasters definitely doing the heavy lifting there, but dropping off quite a bit against tanks and vehicles. Only 5 wounds to a toughness 10 Predator tank, where the Sonic Blasters are wounding on 6s, and then only 3 wounds to a Land Raider, where the Blastmasters are wounding on 5s. I'd say the numbers are solid enough against infantry, a little bit on the low side against vehicles, but I would bear in mind that in 10th edition, ignoring cover, which isn't really factored into this, is quite a big deal. So at least they'd be putting out these numbers even if the opponent had a bonus cover save. Without any further buffs, they're basically pretty strong against infantry of all stripes, but not really so much against monsters and vehicles. You might expect to kill around about something like 70 to 80 points of infantry, depending on what you're firing at. So even there, without buffs and things, you're unlikely to be killing your entire points cost in one turn, even against some fairly optimal targets. Finally, they've got their special rule, which is called Terrifying Crescendo. This one's maybe a bit of a letdown as a special rule really, as basically after they've shot, you get to nominate one unit hit by the squad, and they're going to be -1 to leadership and battle shock tests until the start of your next shooting phase. Battle shock things tend to be kind of underwhelming, and I feel like this one isn't really any better given that it doesn't even force you to roll a test, so unless the opponent's actually going to be taking a test for another reason, it's not going to matter too much. I guess it's not awful though if you wind up shooting a squad down to less than half health, and then they've got a -1 modifier for their own command phase, which usually tends to be when battle shock's the most impactful anyway. It's not nothing, but in general I wouldn't say it's one to normally plan around at all. Overall, with that datasheet, that basically makes them a short-range shooting unit for the Emperor's Children, and pretty much one of the only datasheets that they have that does shooting in a big way. Far better against infantry than tough targets like vehicles, and while they might have some slightly increased toughness stats, they're really not too hard to kill for a bunch of weapons out there. Both small arms and heavy weapons will do at least fairly well for shooting them down. Let's talk about their options for getting a bit more out of them though, and first up they get the Emperor's Children core rule in Thrill Seekers. This one allows them to both advance and shoot and fall back and shoot with the normal restrictions. The advance and shoot could be handy for getting those slightly close range weapons onto their targets, so they move 6 inches, advance d6 inches, and then shoot 18. So typically it means that they can threaten enemy units that are around about 27 inches from their squad. You couldn't have multiple units advancing next to each other alongside though, and still all firing at the same thing, due to the restriction on targeting the same thing per phase with the rule. Otherwise, fall back and shoot is definitely really nice to have just baked in for them. It means that the opponent can't just lock them up by, say, charging them with a transport or similar. They'd just be able to walk out of combat and fire at something. The restriction would just be that they can't shoot at the same thing they just fell back from. Both of these are pretty solid supporting rules though for a close range shooting unit. For leader options, the Emperor's Children have the choice of the Lord Cacophonist or the Sorcerer. The Lord Exultant unfortunately can't join them, which is maybe a bit of a shame. They might have enjoyed his lethal hits. The Lord Cacophonist feels like a bit of a boosted Noise Marine in some ways. He gets the toughness 5 as well, though gets a 2+ save on his armor and 6 wounds, so it's kind of unusually tanky. His printed points in the Codex being 70 points. If he's going for maximal firepower, he might be tempted to take a pair of Screamer pistols. Both of those at those Sonic Blaster profiles, but at 12-inch range, though he can swap one out for a Power Sword if he wants to for a bunch of Strength 5 attacks. For his main buffing rule for the squad, he gives you Sustained Hits 1 for ranged weapons in the unit, so usually around about plus 25% damage output there. If you just literally take the Noise Marine squad, that's around about 33 points worth of extra shooting from including him, never mind what he actually does himself, though with his Screamer pistols he's going to maybe slant the unit a bit more towards destroying things like say standard Space Marines or lighter stuff, given that you get more Sonic Blaster profile shots as opposed to more Blastmasters. Then he also gets that Doom Siren, the great big speaker thing, on top of him. If an infantry unit's hit by this unit's attacks, then roll 3d6. For each 4+ they take a mortal wound, and if they do take a mortal wound they also must take a battle shock test as well. You can only do that for one infantry unit per shooting phase, so usually if you do hit one, that's around about an extra 1 or 2 mortal wounds, which doesn't hurt against some of the tougher targets, that's maybe doubling down on making them a bit better against the thing that they're already quite good at shooting. The other option for the squad leader is the Sorcerer. He gives them the benefit of cover and can hand out movement debuffs to the enemy. I feel like if you want a leader for the Noise Marines though, I think most people would go for the Lord Cacophonist. It just feels a fair bit more impactful to give the unit sustained hits and a damage buff, particularly given that you might be able to get cover saves anyway depending on positioning. Otherwise for unit support though, if you want to get them into shooting range and style, the Chaos Rhino seems like a good option. They feel like they naturally pair with the Rhino really quite well, given that they're shooting units that are at least fairly fragile per point, and they've got a slightly shorter range, so they'll also value the extra movement. With their advance and shoot rule, they still get an okay threat range, but the Rhino could definitely make it a lot bigger. It moves 12 inches, and you can advance and drop as well. So taking into account the extra movement for the advance, and being able to jump out the front of it up to 3 inches, that means in theory the squad could wind up shooting something out of the Rhino that's all the way up to 36 inches away. If they want to remain embarked for a turn for whatever reason as well, you could fire both Blastmasters out of the firing deck too, so you could get the best profiles of the units still dealing damage but from a point of safety. For unit support though, I was interested to see how much damage a squad could do alongside the Lord Cacophonist. So if he's 70 points, that'd be 205 points for this damage, and this one's at 12-inch range, so he can get those Screamer pistols to work. Between his profiles, the sustained hits, and the Doom Siren, you're killing around about 20 Termagants now, or around 9 Space Marine Intercessors, so really messing them up there. Around about 4 Terminators, 8 wounds to a Predator tank, or 4 wounds to a Lamb Raider. The squad would cost significantly more though, and it feels like he's maybe adding just more proportional damage output for the cost, as opposed to necessarily being completely auto-include and something that you need for every squad to make their damage efficient. He definitely adds the most value against the lighter stuff as well, like the Termagants and the Intercessors, where the Screamer pistols are more effective. Otherwise, beyond other datasheets, they've got their detachment buffs, 6 different options for them, and I feel like some of them are a bit more use than others really. Slaanesh Chosen can give you your 1 character unit with reroll wound rolls, which is definitely something that the Noise Marines would really quite enjoy, but it does mean that they have to be accompanied by your Warlord at the start of the game, or otherwise have then had to get a kill and then survive till the next turn to use the damage buffs, so you could be taking that option away from another really seriously scary unit. If they're character led, they do have the option of getting +1 strength to their weapons as well, which perhaps could be quite big for the Sonic Blasters against certain targets I guess. It's help against toughness 10 or toughness 6 quite a bit. Otherwise, that Coterie of the Conceited gets the progressive damage buffs. They might be most interested in the reroll ones to hit and wound, which come quite early in the table. If you can get a few kills out there early, then you could be activating those, and Noise Marines could be reasonable enough choices for getting early kills with a bit of shooting. They've got an Armour of Contempt equivalent and a Feel No Pain in that one, and one stratagem for ignoring modifiers as well, which could be handy against some targets. The Mercurial Host feels quite good for them at giving reroll advances for more reliable threat range. I feel like the reactive move 6 inches is particularly great with them. It means that they could push up the board really quite aggressively if the opponent moves around near them. They could jump to the wrong side of terrain so they can't be shot quite so well, or move back from charges, or even jump back in a transport vehicle if it made sense. And they could also have a bit of an intriguing possibility for a turn 1 Alpha Strike as well, using the Return to Reserve stratagem if the enemy goes first, and then turning up from strategic reserves in your turn. So that means they could just walk on from the edge of the board your turn 1 and blast the enemy with a bunch of Sonic. The Peerless Bladesman doesn't really do so much for them, given that that's all melee focused. They will be hitting a bit harder in melee in that, and it might be more tempting to take the Power Sword on the Sergeant. I guess the extra AP stratagem in a pinch could have them delete an extra squad of light infantry in melee a bit easier. The Carnival of Excess gives them a nice sustained hits 1 if near demons, so you can get that buff without buying them a Lord Cacophonist. So if you did, then they'd be sustained hitting on a 5+ with the Cacophonist. Most of the rest of the detachment isn't quite so standout for them. And finally, maybe saving the best for last for them, Rapid Evisceration feels like it's just a really good pairing with them here. After they jump out of a transport, they get rerolls of 1 to hit and wound out of rhinos, That's a plus 36% damage buff, and rhinos were already an interesting choice for them anyway, having a really big movement range to move them up the board and get lines of sight. I'd say that's the single biggest thing, but there's also a few other options with shenanigans to jump back in the rhinos in various ways, and a few other interesting movement manipulation things. If we wanted to turn things up to 11 for them, here's the rough damage output of a Lord Cacophonist with 6 models jumping out of a rhino in the transport detachment. Basically just inflating the numbers by the same proportional amount. They still make a massive mess of lighter infantry or standard sized space marines. We're up to killing around about an entire Terminator squad here though, or around 11 wounds or so to a Predator tank. So in one shooting phase they're going to take down at least a fair amount of their points cost. This one is quite a big expensive setup though, at 280 points as per the Codex printed prices for the squad, the Lord and the Rhino. Overall, between all that, I feel like they will be an interesting unit for the Emperor's Children. They are kind of notable at being the only dedicated firepower unit for them outside of things like allied war dogs. The only other real shooting that they get are a few las cannons on Land Raiders, which aren't exactly pointed as gun tanks, or maybe some special weapon fire from the Tormentors, and they're certainly not pointed as damage dealers like these guys are. For their pros and cons, they're really quite good against infantry. Inbuilt ignores cover is good in 10th. Advance and shoot can get them range on their targets, and they've got options to rhinos to deliver them, and they can fall back and shoot something different if they need to as well, which is quite a nice advantage and stops them getting tied up by chaff. It feels like they do have a fair few downsides though. They've got a shortish range, not really so general purpose, so not going to be threatening toughness 10 or more, or tanks or monsters quite so much without some big buffs. Their defensive profile really isn't standout for 135 points. Most armies out there are probably going to find them easier to take down than say a battle tank of the same cost, and any casualties will very directly start impacting their damage output. In general, maybe more of the detachments tend to be a bit better at supporting melee in a big way versus range, though the core detachment rule can potentially get them some rerolls or sustained hits or something in at least half of them. Maybe it's 135 points, I'm a bit dubious as to whether they'll actually be able to sort of trade up against the enemy and might have the potential to jump out of cover or a rhino or something, knock something flat that's maybe a bit less than their points cost and then get gunned down in return. I guess you might have to do a bit of overloading the enemy with multiple threats or dealing good damage at the same times perhaps. And finally, it is a shame that their special rule is kind of weak. That could have just been another way to add a bit of fun, but battle shock things tend to be not very impactful right now. Overall, certainly feels like they've got their downsides, though I'd still say they look interesting enough. I feel like being the dedicated shooting unit of the army is going to make people take them. I think if they do wind up being at 135 points, they seem playable but maybe not crazy standout. Maybe taking 1 or 2 units in a list jumping out of rhinos potentially, and perhaps some detachments wanting to favour them a bit more than others. In 10th edition, if shiny new units don't tend to be very good though, Games Workshop does have a habit of adjusting things. I feel like the datasheet certainly got numbers consistent with them being strong. Hopefully Games Workshop will be able to find the right points cost, where they're both interesting to play but not overpowered. I'll be interested to hear your thoughts on them down in the comments below though. What do you make of the new incarnation of Noise Marines? Look forward to hearing your thoughts. As mentioned, if you are looking to pick up the Big Slanesh box set, the discount links are down in the video description. As always, a big thank you to using those, whether it's on big box sets or just Warhammer 40k things in general. They do go to help support the channel. Feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more like this. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming, with new ones out just about every day. There'll certainly be a fair bit more for the Emperor's Children over the next few days. Otherwise, if you want to support the channel a bit more directly, Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well. You can find that linked in the video description below. There's a few rewards for channel backers, such as seeing certain videos early and regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel. In any case though, an enormous thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.